Hello and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Manhattan. I'm Pastor Isabel Call, and it is such a joy to be with you this morning. I've been away for a month, and it is great to be back. A vibrant, inclusive congregation, UUFM is widely known as a safe haven and a force for social justice. This is our vision of ourselves. Our covenant reminds us that we gather to support each other in our personal and community growth. If you're here in person, one of the ways that we can support you and you can support us is by sharing the joys and sorrows that have transpired in your life this week. If you're here in the sanctuary, you can find some papers in a box nearby to write these down. We'll pick it up later to read it aloud, and if you're here on Zoom, there will be time later to type it into the chat. Welcome visitors and newcomers. Please chat with us after the service, and our greeter Shirley is especially available to answer questions here in person, and Linda on Zoom is there to answer questions.
Good morning. My name is Bryce Hobrock. I'm a member here. I had my 88th birthday last month. Saying this up front, I want to acknowledge that the subject of Joseph Priestley was assigned to me 25 years ago by Michael Oldfather, knowing my background in science and other matters. He thought that I should prepare and do this. Somehow it fell through the cracks, so here it is today.
Yes.
Better late than never. So I appreciate the fact that Michael is here this morning. I warned him 2 weeks ago that I was going to mention his name, so I appreciate his inspiration. I'd like to continue with the theme of interconnection and interdependence as we are considering this topic this month. I would like to tell you the story of Joseph Priestley and his role in founding the Unitarian churches of England and America. We surely understand that UU did not appear miraculously by supernatural creation, but we too had a founder, a person responsible for who we are. At UU, we do not have gods like the ancient Greeks and Romans, or a Messiah, Savior, Holy Father, or Mother. We are built upon connections among people. We use reason, and we have an understanding of science, nature, and history to determine our pathways. We had a beginning. We did not appear out of thin air. Now that's probably an archaic expression that only older people understand, but it is also an ironic statement because our founder, Joseph Priestley, is credited with the discovery of oxygen, a critical component of air. It is a thin portion of air, it's only 20%, but it is critical. That discovery was 250 years ago in 1774. Now, if you were paying attention in science class, you will have heard of Joseph Priestley before, but maybe not. Joseph Priestley was born in Yorkshire in 1733. It's not quite 300 years ago. It doesn't seem like too long for a person of my age, but maybe if you're younger, it does seem like a long time ago. Visualize All Creatures Great and Small on PBS if you want to think about, to visualize as I speak about Yorkshire and what it looks like. Joseph Priestley was identified as a chemist, a natural philosopher, a theologian, historian, grammarian, and teacher. But distinctively, he was a dissenter. He was mostly considered a troublemaker, a thorn in the side of government and religion. He was considered to be the preeminent chemist in the world during his lifetime, and he is considered to be the founder of modern chemistry in America. Modern science is considered by most to have begun just 300 years ago. Science in the 18th century was primitive, confined to personal laboratories, and discussed in scientific societies among practitioners like the British Royal Society. 23 centuries before that, the Greek philosophers had suspected that there was an explanation for matter. Well, what's matter? Well, matter is everything that we humans perceive and seems tangible even though we can't see some of it, the gases. They suspected that there was an explanation for all of this, and they decided on earth, air, fire, and water. Well, I considered bringing some props, but the only thing I lack here is a bag of dirt. We have fire, we have water, and of course we have air. That theory was originated by one of the Greek philosophers of that era called Empedocles. He was a contemporary of Aristotle. Aristotle had a much simpler explanation for the being of everything, but not worth mentioning. The Greek word for it all was chemia, spelled with a K, which meant a person who could turn metal into gold. What it meant was, chemia meant that was an alchemist, a person who could turn base metals into gold. Well, that theory of earth, air, fire, and water held as an explanation for 23 centuries until 1667. One of the alchemists, Johann Beckler, created a new explanation from his experiments on combustion, stating that there was another substance that was all-encompassing, that made up everything, called phlogiston, spelled with a PH. The essence of all being is emitted when you applied fire to almost anything. Therefore, at the time that Joseph Priestley was born, phlogiston was believed to be the organizing principle of matter. And that's not too long ago. Priestley was a believer in phlogiston and spent his life trying to define it. Ironically, I have concluded that he did discover it. It was oxygen, and I'll explain why at the end of this. Thus, 300 years ago, serious explanation of the natural world had begun, but the scientists of the day operated within the confines of theology and politics. If a discovery was contrary to the Christian Bible or the theology of the church, the person was branded a heretic and could be cut off from the church and from society, or in some cases executed. Consider that it was just 100 years before Priestley was born that Galileo was called before the Roman Inquisition, 1633, and was forced to recant his heliocentric ideas. Well, what he discovered was that the earth rotates around the sun rather than vice versa. Well, the church believed otherwise. He was placed under house arrest for the rest of his life and thus died in that condition. Well, a word about religion and politics in England in 1733. Joseph Priestley was born into an established English dissenting family. It did not conform to the Church of England, and you will recall that the Church of England was started in 1534 when Henry VIII wanted to divorce Anne of Aragon. The church said, no, you can't do it. He said, well, I'll just form my own church and I'm going to be the head of it. Okay, well, does that sound familiar? Well, the dissenting churches were Calvinist. Their origin was John Calvin, a couple of hundred years before, a French theologian. Calvinism means that your fate is predetermined, and you can't do much about it unless you have a religious experience that qualifies you for salvation. Well, Joseph Priestley kept waiting. Where's my experience? It isn't coming. And he never had it. And it caused him to be rejected from his own Calvinist church. Nevertheless, he wanted to be a minister. He was determined to be. And the only way he could be a minister was to go to a dissenting academy. Now, an academy in those days, I think, meant like a super high school. But the Church of England and the government had laws against dissenters. He could only go to the dissenting academy. Well, he got sick and developed a terrible stutter. Doesn't sound like a good thing for a minister, but he went to Lisbon for a few years and engaged in commerce with a relative, but he still wanted to be a minister. His politics and religion turned leftwards, and he became known as a rational dissenter, which means that he abhorred dogma and religious mysticism. Well, he finished at Daventry, and he took several ministerial calls. You're called by churches to come and be their minister. He was very unsuccessful. Attendance and donations dropped off. His views drove people away. They realized that this guy is not a Calvinist. In fact, they all hit the road. Well, his family also disowned him because of his beliefs, and he was sort of isolated. Well, he made some friends among other dissenters and moved on to a couple of more churches, and he adopted a stance of education rather than theology. And he found that education appealed to young people and that he could attract young people to the church by his program of education. During that time, age 25, he wrote Rudiments of English Grammar. At that time, there were no rules really about language or grammar, and his treatise was adopted countrywide and elsewhere in the world, and he attained the reputation as one of the great grammarians of his time. Well, he continued to be a tutor at one of the dissenting academies, and he believed that history, he became a historian, so to speak, at that time, believing that history was essential for worldly success and that education should anticipate future needs. Thus, he was branded as the founder of utilitarianism. Well, practical meaning of education. Well, we're seeing a resurgence of that today. The classics and everything else isn't allowed unless it doesn't lead to a job. Another stance that he took was very unusual. He promoted the education of middle-class women. His grammar book was so widely admired that at the age of 31, he was awarded a Doctor of Laws by the University of Edinburgh, who titled him as the most important writer on education between John Locke and Hubert Spencer. Well, he also was busy in his home lab at this point. He did science on the side. Primitive as it was, why men of intelligence had home laboratories. So at the age of 33, he took up a study of electricity. He wrote another widely acclaimed treatise, The History and Present State of Electricity. it became the standard throughout Europe. He got a good visitor from Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was touring Europe, as he often did during those times, hung out in Europe, and Franklin came to see Priestley, and they became friends, and Priestley consulted on Franklin's kite experiments, with which you are all familiar. I think his electrical observations were really long-term, in that at that time, people believed that electricity could be conducted only through water and metal. Well, they needed only to look up and see lightning to know that it could be conducted through air. And so he firmed up that point of view, and his observations on electricity and his history inspired Faraday, Coulomb, Maxwell, Herschel, and Cavendish. And I think if we really thought about it, we could attribute the invention of radio and other forms of communication through air as attributed to Priestley. Well, there was a problem in England because Parliament had passed something called the Test and Corporation Acts. Dissenters, such as Priestley, could not hold political office, could not serve in the armed forces, attend Oxford or Cambridge, and they had to subscribe to the 39 articles of the Church of England if they wanted to do any one of those things. Well, as I understand it, the Church of England adopted these same 39 articles, these 39 principles, from the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and made them part of the scene. Well, Priestley maintained his hand in science while pursuing theology, ministry, and politics. His science was always practical, never theoretical. Now, what he discovered was that there was an ample supply of gas coming from all the breweries in the towns where he lived, and that surely it was worth something and it needed to be explored. Well, Priestley is therefore credited with the discovery of carbonated water. He bubbled it through water, and he took a sip, and that tastes pretty good. Well, his science was always practical, and it was never thought of as making money. Well, his friends took care of that. If you go to the grocery store, you will find on the shelf the brand Schweppes. His friends, the Schweppes, became fabulously rich from carbonated water by selling soft drinks back in the mid-18th century. So I guess we can call Priestley the father of the soft drink because it's been with us ever since. He also had other uses suggested. One of them was a cure for scurvy. The British Navy said, we've got this problem. Would carbonated water be of any use? Well, certainly not, because scurvy is caused by a shortage of citric acid and from citrus fruits and other things. But it did turn out to be something useful in the recovery of sailors who came home suffering from scurvy. Somehow carbonated water helped them. Well, at the age of 40, midlife crisis. Priestley at this time had gotten married, had a couple of children, and he needed money. His congregations really didn't feel like paying him well enough to take care of that. But he had a good friend, part of the British aristocracy, named Lord Shelburne, who said, okay, I'm going to hire you as librarian and tutor for my children. Well, he did that for the next 5 years, and it gave him time to develop himself and his views. Some of his ideas were, by studying the natural world, people will become more compassionate, happy, and prosperous. There is no mind-body duality. Everything in the universe is made of matter that we can perceive. Discussing the soul is impossible because it is made of a divine substance, not matter, and we cannot perceive it. Humans have no free will. Human will is determined by natural laws. But he made his great advances with chemistry at this point, around 1774, in experimenting with gases, air, and he decided that, well, everything can be classified as an air, AIR. And so he decided there were several kinds of air. One of them was nitrous air, led him to the discovery of all of the nitrogen oxides, which then led to nitric acid and a substitute for saltpeter eventually in making gunpowder and chemical fertilizer. Acid air, which was actually just anhydrous hydrochloric acid, and then dephlogistated air. Well, he couldn't let go of that idea of phlogiston. He kept on it throughout his life, and when he finally discovered the substance that came off some of his experiments, that this had to be dephlogistated air. In reality, it was oxygen. So you'd have to say that Priestley really identified phlogiston. Well, okay, time for the theology. His friend Theophilus Lindsey had formed a new Christian denomination that would not restrict his members' beliefs. But he was in trouble. People were demonstrating against him, I guess, and so Priestley began preaching at Lindsey's church and thus founded the first Unitarian church in England. This is the break point, this is the point at which he gained his reputation of being the founder of the British Unitarian Church. Encouraged the foundation of new Unitarian chapels throughout Britain and the United, and then later, well, we'll get to the United States later. But probably his best job followed that. He had a falling out with Lord Shelburne. Lord Shelburne had a new wife, and she didn't like the Priestleys. And she said, "Get rid of those obnoxious people." Well, he moved on at one point back to Yorkshire. He still festered with the fact that he had not been well received back in his home community. And he began to have some success there until 1779. He took a position at Birmingham at a church called the New Meeting Church. Was there for 10 years, a very happy decade, lots of peace and success, growing family, scientific success. And he continued to be a supporter, first, of the American Revolution. 1775, Massachusetts was declared to be in a state of rebellion by George III. And 1776, the break and the Revolutionary War, which did not end until 1781. Well, he also supported the unrest in France. The French Revolution, 1789, a lot of bad things going on there. And so he got into trouble, Priestley got into trouble as a defender of the American revolutionists, the English dissenters, and the French revolutionaries. The government decided that Priestley was fomenting revolution. The government became very concerned that they would have a repeat of the French Revolution and destroy George III and the English monarchy at that time. Well, he didn't help himself any because he supported the campaign to abolish the British slave trade about 1788. He said, "Nobody treated enslaved people with so much cruelty as the English." Well, as you can expect, the British government considered him a dangerous person. And the pivotal event that maybe survives in the history of the Unitarian Church are the Birmingham riots of 1791. As it showed afterwards, they were fomented by the magistrates in Birmingham, support of the monarchy. Rioters were fed plenty of beer, I suppose, at the time, and other spirits, formed up together and attacked Priestley's churches. They burned the new meeting church and the old meeting church where Priestley held forth. And they were both Unitarian by definition at that time. And Priestley had to take a run for it. The rioters burned his home, his laboratory, and all of his family belongings. 26 other dissenter homes were burned, plus 3 more churches. Well, Priestley had to find refuge, found it with his friends, and it was later determined that this was fomented by the authorities. King George III sent troops to quell the riots. They went on for days and days. But George III said, quote, "I feel better that Priestley is the sufferer for the doctrines he has instilled," unquote. So he was happy about it. Well, he was unable to return to Birmingham, obviously. Friends helped him rebuild some of his life. He lectured at various churches. But his friends said, "It's time for you to leave England and go to either France or America." Well, so he applied to the French Assembly for naturalization, and it was granted, no problem. He became a French citizen. Well, 2 departments, I guess those are like states in France, elected him to the French Assembly. And so he went to France and started to interact, and he said, "Well, my French isn't good enough. I mean, I don't speak this language." So he reconsidered that. In the meantime, things in England became more untenable, and his sons left England for America in 1793 and said, "Dad, why don't you follow us?" Well, they followed in 1794. Ahead of William Pitt's arrest of radicals for seditious libel in England, he would have been caught up had he stayed. So he spent the next 10 years in America, in Pennsylvania. His sons had joined a consortium that acquired 300,000 acres of forest land in the wilds of Pennsylvania. It is what is today Northumberland County in Pennsylvania. And for the old fathers, it's 100 miles west of where they are living on the Susquehanna River, just up from Harrisburg. Well, everybody wanted a piece of Priestley when he arrived in America. He was so well known that he was invited to give sermons in Philadelphia at the First Church. This led to the founding of the First Unitarian Church of Philadelphia, and hence the founding of the American Unitarian Church here. Well, he had another offer. One, University of Pennsylvania offered him a position as in the chemistry department at Penn, if such things existed at that point. They wanted him. He turned it down and acquired a 400-acre tract in the backwoods of Pennsylvania and began to rebuild the home and laboratory and other things that he had had in England. But he was spending most of his time in Philadelphia. I'm sure somebody else was doing the work. And about that point, he became embroiled in American politics. Got crossways with John Adams. John Adams wanted to enlarge the Navy and to convert the militia to a standing army at that time, which he advised him not to do. But he became very good friends with Thomas Jefferson. And he managed to be accused of being a spy for France along the way. But he advised Jefferson in the founding of the University of Virginia, and he continued with his scientific investigations there until his death. It is said that he stimulated the interest in chemistry in America at that point, but it was difficult because he could not communicate adequately from this place with England and France. And beside England and France were at war once again. And he made a mark for himself here. I'm going to wrap up now by summarizing what were his accomplishments. He was a member of every major scientific society in the Western world. He discovered numerous substances, leading to many other discoveries, including photosynthesis, chemical fertilizer, and electrical theory. He is titled the father of modern chemistry. He helped to found Unitarianism, and today he is remembered in many ways in England and America with statues, plaques, and everywhere. The highest award outside the Nobel Prize today is given by the American Chemical Society, is titled the Priestley Medal. So it is a legacy that he earned, and I will stop at that point for any questions you may have. Yeah, Larry.
Oh, wait just a minute, and Mark will turn on the mic. There you go.
Thanks, Brock. I learned a lot. There's a story that Priestley was friends with Benjamin Franklin, as you mentioned, and Franklin had noticed that when he did his electrical experiments, if he used sort of a fishing pole and dropped a piece of paper or something that had electric charge on it into the cavity of a jar, say, that was itself electrically charged, that the paper was unaffected. It seemed not to know about the charges outside itself, on the jar. And he mentioned this to Priestley and observed, you know, Newton had discovered that that's the way gravity behaved. Maybe there's something like, maybe electricity is something like gravity. Mm-hmm. Well, Priestley had a friend in France, I guess it was, Coulomb, or maybe that was England, I'm not sure. Anyway, Coulomb was stimulated to try to check out the way electricity affected things, and sure enough, it obeyed the same 1 over the square of the distance that gravity did. Mm-hmm. And that leads us to modern quantum theory, but that's for another day.
Yeah, well, modern quantum theory says there are 4 forces in the universe: electromagnetism, which is what you're talking about here, gravity, and then the strong and weak force. So it's right on track. Thank you, Larry.
Thanks, Bryce. I was just curious, do we have any surviving sermons of his?
I did not look for them. I'm pretty sure they exist. In my earlier research, there's a lot more material about the substance of things.
Yeah, this would be fun to look into.
Okay.
I'm curious if anyone has a thought about just his life story. I mean, it was all over the map, and how it relates to your life or where we're at as a community or as a nation.
Diane?
Did Priestley have any opinions on how the first peoples ought to be treated?
Diane asked, did Priestley have any opinions on how the first peoples ought to be treated?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm sure it did not escape his notice when he went into the backwoods of Pennsylvania, and the mercenary nature of his son's consortium that was selling off 300,000 acres that had been formerly occupied by Native Americans, just like developers of today. 400 acre tracts. That was considered standard at the time for developers. There was a hectare measurement in that somewhere. But if he was a champion of an opponent of slavery, I don't know how he could have failed to have noticed that.
I thought it was interesting that interconnections, you sharing with us how he's the father of so many elements of our lives, or of our collective life, including perhaps gunpowder, and just how we're interrelated with both the good and the bad, that we are touched.
Yeah. At the time of his experimentation, there was nothing about the elemental theory of matter. The idea of atoms and elements didn't really exist at that point. And he missed out on all that, but at the time he moved to America, because Lavoisier in France, who is also claiming to have discovered oxygen about the same time, went on with the scientists in continental Europe and England at that time to develop the theory that everything just wasn't made up of a bunch of metals, which were known at the time. But today we know there are 92 elements built up one by one from 1 to 92. And so this is the beginning of things. He triggered a lot of activity, but obviously we don't all live to see what happens next. We think we know everything today. We're so smart, you know. Humans dominate everything. But can you imagine 300 years hence what we will discover about today and what we think we know?
Any question or comment from Zoom?
I have something. I just did a, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
I just did a quick Google search and there are many of his sermons available, including one on the slave trade, which he gave to a group of dissenters, and one which has the lovely title of The Pleasures and Advantages of a Good Conscience.
Thank you. Well, let us close the conversation here and continue it in coffee hour. Thank you, Bryce.